If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
So you know what I love?
What? Tell me.
I love when we have new ideas that come out in a couple of the books that we read.
Mm-hmm. You mean things we haven't ever bumped into before?
Yeah. So this happened with something called the polyvagal theory or the polyvagal nerve, right? Okay.
I'll get to that.
So it first showed up in What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry. That was a book we talked about on episode 40 about trauma and how, understanding trauma can help us understand other people and how we should all really be trauma informed, because between capital T trauma and little t trauma, there's so many of us that have experienced some form of trauma.
Oh, I think you can't go through life without that.
Right. And so that was first mentioned in that book, I believe, and he talks a lot about top-down versus bottom-up theory, and that didn't make any sense to me until here recently. And then Mel Robbins in The High Five Habit had some advice about, putting your hand on your heart or taking a hot bath and how this will help relax your nervous system. And she referred to the polyvagal theory in this. So that had us going,
Mm-hmm.
So Eleanor, we got together, and we're like, okay, we got to read a book about this. We got to figure it out.
And we kind of went on a search to find a book, and we didn't really have anybody to recommend one to us. So we just took a luck of the draw and picked one.
Right. And we try to look at good ratings and one that's kind of new. Tell us a little about this book, Eleanor.
The book, it was released in 2021, and it is called Anchored, How to Befriend Your Nervous System Using Polyvagal Theory, and it's by Deb Dana. And Deb Dana is a clinician and a consultant specializing in using the lens of polyvagal theory. Her clinical publications include Polyvagal Theory in Therapy and Polyvagal Flip Chart. So she has written this book from the perspective of a clinician, and I am not a clinician. So I had a little difficulty with what was going on. But it's published by a publishing company called Sound True in Boulder, Colorado. So I don't know much about this publishing house or what their focus is. Do you know anything about?
I don't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the way the book is structured is she gives you foundation in what polyvagal theory is, and then she talks about all these different angles to look at it. In the introduction, though, she says, the chapters in this book offer small steps that help you befriend your nervous system. The experiential practices build from one chapter to the next in an order designed to keep the process from feeling overwhelming. Each chapter offers practices labeled explorations to bring the theory portion into an embodied experience. So after you've completed the book, you can go back and reread the chapters and return to the explorations. They're offered so you can experiment as you go and then come back to the ones that help you feel a sense of well-being and make them part of your ongoing practice. So it's a kind of it is called a how to befriend your nervous system. And so she's giving you exercises and explorations. And I found it very difficult to read this book. I felt, and maybe that's because I come from things like I really want a grounded explanation of what you're talking about. This is a theory. I'd say it's a hypothesis. I'm not sure it's a theory. I don't know. It's so new.
It's very new.
That's why I say I think it's a hypothesis. I think it needs to be tested a little bit more. But I do believe in some of the results and all this stuff. So it's like I'm conflicted in this book. So I'm thinking she may not be the author that I needed to read.
Yes, I agree with that. So after the fact, I've learned of, I might butcher his, I might butcher
Stephen
his
Porges.
last. Porges,
Yeah.
yes. Stephen Porges.
Me too, because he wrote the foreword, so I looked him up.
Yeah, yes, and he's the
guy that originated the theory.
Exactly. And he has a book called The Polyvagal Theory, Neurophysiological Foundations of Emotions, Attachment, Communication, and Self-Regulation. And I thought, ooh, that might have been better for Eleanor.
Definitely better for me, because I listened to some of his YouTubes and podcasts, and I liked the guy a lot, and he could describe it better. She tries to translate it, and she admits that. And he says in the foreword, she's done a great job of translating a very complicated, very intricate system for the general reader.
Right.
But I didn't think she did. It just confused the heck out of me.
Yeah, I think that, so she has another book too, that Polyvagal in Therapy.
Yeah,
But I'm like, maybe if I read that one first, this would make more sense.
Or if you're a therapist or someone,
Correct, yeah.
clinician, I think you could use these explorations. I mean, instead of reading about it, I would have rather had a
guide.
Yes, to talk. I've been in therapy sessions before and benefited from them. I think I would benefit from some of these. I think people would. But this book, I think, should be read by people who have more experience in counseling and therapy, and it's particularly directed to people who have trauma, really big trauma, and are not functioning, and they are in collapse or shut down or anxious. Mm-hmm. So I think for someone who's somewhat regulated, and we'll talk more about that, this book was a little confounding to me.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to share with the listeners, what is the polyvagal theory, and
as best we can describe
as best as we can. And yeah, because maybe there'll be some takeaways with or without trauma in your past.
Well, can I just take on the title, polyvagal?
Yeah.
Since you mentioned that earlier. We have cranial nerves, and we have sacral nerves, and we have somatic nerves. The nerves are part of the nervous system. You have the brain, spinal cord, and then you have these nerves that connect to tissues. The 10th cranial nerve is called the vagus. And so there's a right and a left. There are two of them. During development, they get twisted around. It's kind of funny, the course of the vagus nerve. And during development, we have things that are called gill slits. They're called branchial arches. Mm-hmm. And so that's up in the neck area, sort of higher in the anterior portion of the developing fetus. So there's things that happen with those tissues. So what's interesting about the vagus nerve is a mixed nerve, meaning it has sensory and motor functions. So there's signals going up this nerve to the brain saying, here's what we know about the inside environment and maybe the outside environment. Mm-hmm. And then there's a response that comes down. So that's a motor. There's an action based on that input, and then action. And you can have a reflex. Now, since the cranial nerves are in the brain stem, they can, and in the spinal cord connections with the thoracolumbar, the middle portion, there's reflex arcs. But then there are ways to override those with the higher cortical centers. And that's why this gets so complicated. There are connections to these input signals and output signals. And so it doesn't obey all the rules of when you say, oh, that's somatic and this is autonomic, because those are functional descriptions of the nervous system. And he's focusing, or she is focusing on the autonomic system, which most of us know as a automatic. You don't think about it. It's unconscious. It's the things that regulate your breathing pattern, your heartbeat, your digestive juices, your urinary reflexes, etc. So polyvagal, I think what they're saying is there are lots of fibers in the vagus nerve. Mm-hmm. Is it two nerves? I don't know. I thought it was an interesting title, polyvagal. Many vaguses.
Mm-hmm. Well, and many, right? Because we talk about this ladder approach, right?
You mean the hierarchical? I mean, like 1, 2, 3?
Yeah. Well,
ladder?
The ladder is how she describes it. Or maybe
go ahead.
I made that up, right?
No, I think she does talk about a ladder.
When when we're feeling safe and regulated, that's our vagus nerve doing its job, right?
Well, the ventral.
The ventral.
You want to live in ventral.
You want to live mostly in ventral.
Yeah, there's ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal.
And when you're feeling safe enough in your environment, then you can think clearly, you can grow, you can apply these strategies to health and wellness. But if you are not feeling that way and you're maybe stuck from something that has happened to you, you might be stuck in the sympathetic, which is fight or flight, right? Action. You want to move. You're anxious. You're worried. You're planning. You're taking action. And then if that doesn't work, then you go into dorsal, which is more of a freeze.
Yeah, collapse or just paralysis even.
So
shut down.
You've been through this stressor.
Dissociation is the other word they use. Yeah.
You've been through this stressor, this trauma. You're shut down. You're disassociating from your body. This is your last effort to survive. And depending on your trauma, you might be stuck in that. And when I mentioned the book What Happened to You by Bruce Perry,
and Oprah Winfrey was on that one.
And Oprah Winfrey, he talks about, in therapy, and we talk about things and we think about them with our brain, but for those who have experienced trauma, the brain isn't activated or working because they're stuck in this fight or flight. Or
the autonomic system. They're not in the cortical higher level thinking. They're down in that responsive.
So when he says bottom up, it means, finding a way like she does in this book to make our way back to that safety, back up that ladder. That's kind of why I have it in my mind as a ladder, because if we're down in dorsal and we're disassociated, we're like a turtle, right, with their head tucked in. And we have to find ways to make our nervous system feel safe, because after the trauma and we go out into the world, it doesn't make sense, like logically, why we would still feel like a turtle, right? Like just sitting in this room might activate me feeling like a turtle, but it would make no sense because I'm in a safe environment.
Absolutely.
My nervous system just doesn't know that.
Well, your signals have been complicated by history.
Right.
So you're subliminally or unconsciously picking up signals that have been programmed from that earlier experience, and you're not even aware of it. So like when you come into this safe space and you feel your heart racing and you don't know why, it's because that autonomic system is getting information saying, we were here once before, we don't like this. And so we're going to move you to sympathetic or to dorsal, as I understand it.
Right.
Now, I hate those words. I mean, in the general public, who knows what dorsal and ventral means?
I know. She uses them a lot, too.
I know, and it's like, why would you use words like that? Because and in the brain, the angles change. So what's up and what's down and what's right and what's left, aren't necessarily the same. So dorsal and ventral, anterior, posterior, but that doesn't convey to a general conversation. It's an anatomical location. And I think for people who have some interest in that are confused by what they're doing.
Right. She should have just stuck to the fight,
well, he
flight,
set
or
it
freeze.
up. He set it up.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it has to do, I think, with the location of the nuclei of the 10th cranial nerve. There's two of them. There's a nucleus ambiguous and the nucleus solitarius, and they're located, one's dorsal and one's ventral in the medulla, but
just not.
Say what now?
Good words,
exactly.
right?
And it's like, so why don't we use safe and fear or something that people would understand?
Yeah.
Or collapse, or just use the words they use.
So normally we move between these states. Like, it's okay to sometimes be in that fight or flight, because that could be some positive energy
it's
or necessary.
And let's talk about what you said about the turtle.
Yeah.
Evolutionarily.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because the turtle,
it's the oldest part
is a
of
reptilian.
our nervous system.
Well, a lot of people like to call it the reptilian brain, which I don't agree with. But anyway, there's a common function across the ages, and survival is really critical for life. If you're alive, you've got to survive long enough to reproduce. And so whatever it takes to get you to the reproduction so that your little population can go to the future is important. So there are avoidance behaviors, toxic exposures. You can even see that in bacteria in a petri dish if you're growing them and you put a competitor in there that secretes a chemical that could hurt the other bacteria, they'll move away from it. So, going to safety is a ancient strategy for survival. No, it's not. You don't think about it. It works. If you avoid it, you're going to live. So it's successful, and you live to reproduction. All right, we get to the reptiles. They have little tiny brains. They don't. Our brain, when we get to the mammalian part of evolution, the brain has exploded and is much larger than in other organisms, and so the cognitive functions are greater than they are in some of these other animals. So a snake with a small brain can actually shut down and look like it's dead for a long time. It can go without oxygen. Well, mammals, our brains are too big. We got to have oxygen. So if we shut down, we can't shut down to no oxygen, really. So we just kind of just become withdrawn, and we can continue to live. If we go the rest of the way, we're going to die. And sometimes you do. You go to shock and you die. You have a heart attack and you're out. So this idea of the turtle going into his shell, if you knock, he's in there, and you go knock on his shell, he's not going to say, "Oh, it's safe to come out now," right?
Right.
So you got to just give him his space until he's getting the signals like, okay, whatever's out there is gone. I can open up and pick out, And that's kind of one of the ideas they're talking about here. Subliminally, you sometimes have to let people have that time and the exercises to say, okay, I can re-enter engagement. And this idea of sociality, which was kind of a new word for me, connection, is part of the discussion here too.
Right, because our nervous systems, the vagal nerve, is the newest part of our... That based on this, right? The dorsal was the oldest. The sympathetic came next. And then,
yeah, whatever. Okay. Yeah,
according
to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to feel home and to feel this safety might not, it might not come naturally for some just because of what they've experienced. But we are social beings. She opens the book kind of talking about how we are social beings, and we strive to be co-regulated. So we look, if our system is stuck in fight or flight, or we're disassociated, we're still longing, even though it's tricky, we're still longing to feel connected. And we seek out somebody else's nervous system who's very regulated so it can help us kind of come out of our shell. And so I think this is really important for all of us, whether it's being curious and more aware of your own nervous system or those around you, how you can be a supportive friend, colleague, or professional when you notice somebody's nervous system, right? You might notice them start to shift or their eyes not make eye contact with you anymore. You can be like, I wonder what is going on with their nervous system. And you just taking a deep breath sometimes can help you convey this sense of calm that helps that person. And then also kind of going back to the concept in what happened to you is not judging them for their behavior, but just kind of coming with a curiosity and understanding that, it might be just something from their past.
Which is that trauma-informed concept that I think is very valuable. When we talk about social interaction, we crave it, and it has been a benefit to the human population to be in society, in a collective. Not to be by yourself. There are protections and there are ways to, raise the young, gather the food that benefit the tribe or whatever. But for us to get close to each other, we have to feel safe. And we're not going to be able to reproduce or touch each other unless we can get close, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's really complicated to keep that safety so that those other things can occur that benefit us. And so if you've had a trauma in getting close to someone, you can see how that's going to impact your ability to function with other people, because your internal system that you're not totally aware of is picking up signals and making you have a reaction that you don't have any control over.
Yeah.
And so it's not something you're choosing to do. It's like, just change, get better. People tell people, just get over it. I'm trying,
Right.
But my body's not working.
Exactly. Or when people are like, calm down, it'll be okay.
Oh, yeah. It's not that big a deal.
She talks about should, too. And I think, in health and wellness, it's easy to say, oh, you should work out every day. You should
Watch your calorie intake.
watch your calorie, whatever. But should turns us into that fight or flight, right? It makes
language.
it an obligation, and then we feel some shame and guilt rather than an invitation to try this out. So at Well Balanced Nutrition, we try hard not to use that word should and help our clients notice when they're using it in their own self-talk. I like one analogy before I forget that she has in the book, and that's the nervous system is our operating system that is shaped by our experience. Mm-hmm. And I like the idea, even though I don't love the book, I like the idea of befriending your nervous system because it is your operating system, and sometimes, right, we think our brain is the only thing controlling us, but
it's the head-heart thing. And
mind, body.
Yeah, face, heart, and all that kind of stuff. I agree. I really think this subject is good, important, and needs to be pursued and communicated. I had difficulty because I don't come from a clinical background. Mm-hmm. It's not my favorite way to enter a conversation. So that, I think, was a reader problem for me. But I do think we need to go into the principles of this theory. You talked about the hierarchy, and then there is the neuroception, which was kind of a new word.
Yeah.
And I liked it because it's not perception. A perception occurs in the higher cortical centers, like your upper brain.
Your thinking brain.
Yeah. And so when you are having perception, you detect some input, you detect, it's hot in here or whatever, and then you evaluate that. Oh, I'm comfortable, or no, I'm really not comfortable, and then you have an action out of that. So there's the detection, evaluation, and a decision. In neuroception, you don't have that. It's just reflexive. It's what goes in, triggers a response, comes out. And so there's not that override. And so he's talking about, or she, and his theory, and she's trying to interpret it for the rest of us, is there's no conscious override of the neuroception.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why you can be sitting somewhere and all of a sudden start sweating or, fall down. Like we read, I think it was in maybe What Happened to You, where the fella is walking down the street.
He had PTSD.
Here's a backfire and dives under the car thinking he's back in the combat zone.
And that could be his nervous system.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. That was a neuroception. His body got the signal, and they said, we know what to do, but we're going to take care of you. You will survive this. But it was inappropriate because there was not a conscious override to evaluate, I'm in this place 20 years later.
He couldn't have thought his way out of that.
No. And that's why these exercises the explorations in here could be extremely, I think, valuable. Mm-hmm. And they incorporate journaling. There is an exercise in that, and we've read many times about the importance of writing and processing. It's very, very beneficial. All right, so there's a hierarchy of the safety, the sympathetic, and the shutdown, and then there's neuroception, and then you were speaking about the co-regulation. Those are the three principles of this theory, that if we can self-regulate, and then there's the idea of co-regulating together and how important that is, what we do with each other. And it's that sociality of humanity where we can be embraced in the arms of each other and feel safe. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a beautiful thought, I think. I was a little disappointed because they didn't talk anything about neurotransmitters, and we've read a lot about, cortical trophin releasing factor that leads to the cortisol and the norepinephrine, which are adrenaline, things like that.
I would love to read something that connects these two. Yeah,
that stress response that we keep running into. We don't want to live in chronic stress.
Right.
And that's another thing about this polyvagal theory. They're saying the chronic stress issue.
Stress on the body.
Right.
If you're stuck in fight or flight.
Right.
Or disassociation.
The elements of well-being, you said when you feel safe and you're in the ventral, how do you know you're there? There's this 3 C's that they came up with, which is, the context of where you are, the choice, and the connection. Those are things you can evaluate, where am I? Am I safe? And, I like where I am. And do I have choice to be here or not? Mm-hmm. Or, and then am I connected to my community?
The 3 C's. I'm glad you brought that up. Mm-hmm. Context, choice, connection.
Mm-hmm. Then there were 3 R's that I bumped into in here, which I thought was kind of fun too. And if I can remember what they were, that would be helpful. Did you run into those?
I listened to the audiobook, so I was terrible at taking notes.
Oh, yeah. You react. This is caring for your nervous system. You're going to react to what's going on, and then you're going to return to the ventral. You're going to use these exploration repatterning exercises to bring yourself back to the ventral or safety, and then you're going to reflect on that experience. So what did I feel? What happened to me? Did my eyes start blinking? Did I start breathing heavily? What was going on? And then reflect on all that. So that's how you care for the nervous system.
So let's say you react. So that guy jumps under a car when he hears a car backfire or whatever. And then he can return back to his sense of safety when he's able to, and then reflect on what happened. Got it.
Yeah.
I was kind of out of the blue here, but I was thinking that when you're in the fight or flight or the freeze, the dissociation, I thought it was interesting how you can easily misinterpret other people's signals, which is one way that it makes connection hard. So maybe you just have like a flat face, but I interpret that as, oh my gosh, she's mad at me. And then I have this whole internal story.
Oh, yeah, we call that information from nowhere. You make up a story about something that's absolutely not grounded in anything at all, but you believe it.
You believe it.
Yeah.
And it becomes so much worse when you're not feeling safe and regulated. You can just misinterpret it.
Yeah.
So many things.
Yeah. These 3 R's, I just quote what she said in the book about flexibility and resilience. We need to remember that well-being is not defined by a nervous system that is always regulated. So you need to react. Bring up a moment that had some intensity for you. Consider how you reacted. Where did your nervous system take you? Then return to regulation. Remember the feeling of coming back to regulation and anchoring here. She says we want to anchor in ventral. And, where is your home away from home? When you're not in ventral, where do you tend to go? Did you remember that part?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you want to return to your anchored center in safety in ventral and then reflect. Take some time to look back on the experience. What is there to learn from the way your nervous system responded?
I think this would be a great thing to go through with a therapist or a trusted friend.
I think therapists should be introduced to this, absolutely. The idea of the vagal brake was another idea that I thought was kind of interesting.
Which is
when
your heart and the vagal nerve?
Yeah, the vagal nerve has a branch that goes to the heart, it goes to the respiratory center, it goes to the gut. So when you are in fight or flight, you shunt blood from digestion and send it to your muscles so you have enough power to move your body and breathe and keep that heart pumping to get the blood around. And then when you're in the parasympathetic, which I don't know what they're going to do with that, but I call that, it's fight or flight. Parasympathetic is feed or breed. That's when you're relaxed enough to feel that you can eat and not get killed, or have sex and not be slaughtered. So this idea of the vagal brake is when the input comes down the brainstem and goes to the heart, it goes right to the sinoatrial node. And so the neurotransmitters that come out there either upregulate the heartbeat or downregulate the heartbeat, depending on what the signals are. So if you're in your parasympathetic, you're going to slow down. Your heart rate's going to come down. If you're in a danger zone, sympathetic discharge, you're going to pump that heart rate's going up.
And focusing on your breath, taking a deep breath can reactivate that, right?
That's exactly what that break is. And so what you're doing is with some of these breathing exercises in the inhalation, and we read a book called Breath.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I want to go back and look at again now that we've done this. Inhalation releases the brake and the heart rate increases. And then when you exhale, it puts the brake back on and your heart rate decreases. So when we are in yoga practices and other things like that, we pay attention to our breathing, and we breathe in, and then with very slow exhalation, you remember doing that? Mm-hmm. That's putting the vagal brake back on, and it's letting the heart rate come down and soothe you and come out of that fight and flight response.
Oh, that's so neat.
And that's why I was hoping this book was going to explain yoga to me, because I know yoga's cool. And
maybe if I
can
podcast,
understand, maybe
we'll explore yoga.
But it's, I want to know why and how. I want to take the watch apart and see how it works, and that's kind of what I want to do with yoga, because I know yoga works, right. and I'm sure these things work too. But I'm just curious as to how, and that's why I think it's a hypothesis at this point, and not really the only explanation for what's going on. But maybe it is. Maybe it is.
Fair enough. I appreciate your approach to that. And I loved learning about the nervous system and this theory, and just how I can be more trauma informed, how we all can be more sensitive to people's operating systems that, are affected by things that happened to them in the past, and how we can just be sensitive to that. Well, I'm Kristen Norton at Well Balanced Nutrition, one of the 3 registered dietitians who are able to help you create healthy habits around food and nutrition. We invite you to visit our website, wellbalancednutrition.com, check out our free content, and maybe even sign up for a free clarity call to see if nutrition coaching is right for you.
And I'm Eleanor at 360health, 4u.com. And I would like to help you nourish your nervous system. If it's not getting the nutrients it needs to keep the cells in the nervous system healthy, I'm not sure that we can expect it to work as well as it can. So if you're interested in a healthy nervous system, read this book, or go read one by Stephen Porges, or look at some of those videos that are online. It's a most interesting topic. Until next time, keep reading.
Have a great one.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.